everybody, welcome to our weekly lecture. I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold. Today's lecture is on International Master Mark Diesen, RIP. And the sponsor of the lecture wrote, Gabe Saloom, he's the sponsor, a student of National Master Alfred Carlin, who wanted people to know who Mark was, Mark Diesen. He was the strongest player in Louisiana when I was growing up. I'm not sure if that's Alfred Carlin or Gabe, but probably both. So anyway, thanks for sponsoring the lecture. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, contact my wife Karen at atlchessclub.com. Now, I've never met Mark Diesen because he retired from chess very early, and I didn't know much about him because I've never met him or seen him, but he actually played tournament chess when I did. But when he played in the U.S. Championship in 1980, I was 10 or 11 years old, depending on what month it was, and I was rated about 1,500. So I never played in a tournament he played in. The only thing I knew about Mark Diesen before today was he won the World Junior Championship in 1976, which is unusual, because the previous American to win the World Junior Championship was Bill Lombardi, who won it in 1957. Coincidentally, which is not pointed out in the Wikipedia page, I guess I didn't write it, that's the year Diesen was born. Makes you think. I'm not sure what it makes you think about, but something. And my recollection of Lombardi winning it, and I could be wrong about this, and if I am wrong, man, is YouTube going to hammer me. They're going to be like, that's wrong, and that didn't happen. My recollection was when Lombardi won the World Junior, there was some kind of boycott by some Eastern European countries, and Lombardi won 11-0. That's my recollection. It could be I made all that up, but I'm old, so I pasted it together from sugar packets. Anyway, now, I had a discussion once with John Fedorowicz, who played in the junior championship in question, and every U.S. junior always claims that their juniors are the strongest, and they point to the number of GMs who played and the number of future GMs. And in the 70s, you had a lot of U.S. junior championships that had a lot of future grandmasters. In one of the junior championships, including the one in 76, they had Sarawan, Fedorowicz, Firmian, Mark Diesen, Michael Rode, and those were the weak players. I mean, they weren't, I'm kidding, but anyway, Fedorowicz told me that the U.S. Junior Championship in 76 was a stronger tournament than the World Junior Championship, and he said he knew whoever won the U.S. Junior would win the World Junior, and that's what happened. Mark Diesen, who never became a grandmaster, he won the U.S. Junior in 76. Then he went to Groningen, which is in the Netherlands, and he won the World Junior Championship. Now, since Diesen's won in 1976, the U.S. has had many World Junior champions, including Yasser Sarawan, Max Delugi, Ilya Gurovich. I want to say Tal Shaked, but I'm not sure if that's correct. I think it is. And I feel like I'm missing somebody. So if you're the person I'm missing and you're watching, sorry. I think we've had like 5 since. Anyway, unusual for an IM, he beat a lot of GMs who were very strong. He didn't beat GMs like me. He beat Larry Evans, Ivkov, John Nunn, Eugenio Torre, and he beat a lot of the American players in the 70s who would later become strong GMs. And he actually moved around a lot. He was born in Buffalo, New York, and he died living in suburban Texas. However, he did grow up in Potomac, Maryland, which is a suburb of DC, which our one viewer knows about. And because of that, he got lessons from Ľubomír Kovalik. And Kovalik was one of the top 10 players in the world at one point, and he's a Czech grandmaster who emigrated to the U.S. In the late 60s, early 70s, and played in many U.S. championships. And Kovalik was his coach for a while, so that must have helped. There's a very strange story. In the 80 U.S. Championship, the only U.S. Championship Diesen played in, he withdrew after 3 rounds because he injured himself in a fall. So that's unusual. He graduated from University of Tennessee in chemical engineering, dropped out of chess, and worked for Shell Oil, Pennzoil, and Noble Energy in the engineering field. And then when he was later in life, he would coach in the Houston area where he lived. He lives in Conroe, Texas, which is next to Houston. And I'm going to be watching a football game pretty soon next in Houston. And what's funny about that is you guys on YouTube already know what happened, but I don't. So in, let's see, what is it, 6? In 2 hours and 15 minutes, Michigan is going to play Washington. Go Blue. But you guys already know the result. Mark Diesen had 3 daughters and was married and so forth. His chess career is mainly in the 70s. In the early 80s, he stopped playing chess and went to work and such and so forth. Okay, let's have a look. I tried to find people he beat that were famous. Okay, first game is against John Nunn. John Nunn is one of the smartest people on earth. He's a chess grandmaster. He's been top 10 in the world in chess. He's won several times the World Problem Solving Championship in chess. He's an amateur astronomer, and by amateur I mean he's better than most professionals. And he takes pictures in space with cameras I can't afford to look at. Also, John Nunn was the second youngest person to graduate from either Oxford or Cambridge. First one, then the other. And he was a professor. He taught math while he was one of the top players in the world at one of those. I think he graduated from one and taught at the other. But anyway, John Nunn's a smart guy, and he's a very strong player. They played in the 73-74 Christmas Congress, which I assume is Hastings, but it doesn't say Hastings, so maybe I'm wrong. How could I be wrong? Okay, so Mark Diesen's white. Now, what I like about Mark Diesen is you don't know what opening he's going to play, which is very unusual for the 70s. Normally, you know what a guy plays every time with white and black, but Diesen just played everything. And according to Wikipedia, Kovalik was a very sharp tactician and liked to do tactics, and Diesen, his student, was a positional player and didn't like tactics. But okay, this meant that Diesen could learn a lot of tactical stuff from Kovalik. Okay, so Nunn played unorthodox because Nunn is a famous grandmaster and Mark Diesen's an IM, and this was in 73-74, so this was before Mark Diesen became famous for winning the World Junior Championship. He was just a random American IM, so John Nunn has to play something a little bit wacky to get Diesen out of prep and then outplay him. That was the idea. And one of the things I teach a lot is to move your king up in the endgame, and if you don't believe me, then after watching this game, you will believe me. And then Nunn will believe me. So white played very solid positional style against this modern, okay, knight h6, very strange. I guess black wants to play f5, and then maybe the knight can go to f7 later, but it's still very strange. Doesn't want to block his f-pawn, and his knight has a couple of squares to go to. Okay, and then Diesen put it in h. And this is ahead of his time. Like nowadays, when people play h4, that's normal. And one thing I discuss a lot with my students and my stream and people at the bus stop who are trying to take a nap, I'm like, hey, wake up, I gotta tell you something. So when a lot of club players are playing in a tournament, they have this terrible what? Fear of playing higher rated players. They can't wait to try to draw the game. Okay, strong players don't do that. So if you're an IM and you're playing a GM, you're trying to win. If you're a GM playing a stronger GM, you're trying to win. Good players, masters, international masters, grandmasters, they try to win. lower rated players often say, well, I had a good position, but my opponent's 1,400 and I'm 1,200, so I accepted a draw. Okay, and you can see the way Diesen plays. He doesn't say, oh no, I'm playing somebody better than me, I hope I can draw. He plays h4. And this was before every computer engine said always play h4. Okay, so obviously he's playing to win. h4 is a very aggressive move. He could play h3 if he was trying to be solid. Okay, Nunn played c5, counterattacking in the center when white's playing on the flank. h5, playing on the flank again. Black lost to tempo because black played c6 and c5. Then they traded. Now it looks like a Sicilian where black's played knight h6, which makes no sense. It's like a dragon Sicilian where both knights are misplaced, and somehow white's pawn's on h5 already. So it looks great for white. Knight c5, bishop b5 check, bishop d7, bishop e3. It's difficult for me to imagine where black is going to put his king. Queen a5, very aggressive, and he plays king f1. White doesn't want a castle because white wants to attack down the h-file. White doesn't want a castle queenside because the queen and knight are here, the bishop is here, and white's already played a4. So white decided f1 was the best square for his king. And you can see by white playing h4, h5, king f1, he's not playing for equality. He wants to attack black's king and says black has nowhere safe to go. Rook c8, putting the rook on the half-open file, very Sicilian-esque. Knight b3, attacking the queen, doubling white's pawns, getting rid of one of black's only good pieces. Bishop c6, queen d5. And in this position, white's threatening bishop takes c6 check, and then queen takes queen. Now in this position, things got a little crazy. And a friend of mine once told me, tripled pawns are 3 times as good, although he might have been kidding. Or he was bad at chess, I don't know. So Nunn decided he'll give his opponent tripled pawns. And he played the move, queen takes b5. Notice, bishop takes queen is illegal, and therefore was not played. So he took the bishop, and now bishop takes is legal. That's why queen takes doesn't lose a queen. Queen takes b5, bishop takes b5, a takes b5. So white has triple pawns, but I have a really nice rook on your a pawn, and you still can't castle because your knight on h6 isn't sufficiently defended in that case. And your a pawn is incredibly attacked. It's attacked twice and defended 0 times. And if I take with the rook, your b pawn's probably going to go away too. So this is actually good for white. Knight g4, getting the knight off of the terrible h6 square. Bishop takes a7, saving the bishop, winning a pawn. King d7. King's good in the center in the endgame. f3. You can't play knight e3 check because the bishop goes backwards, in case you were thinking that. So he played knight e5, king e2, and white's a pawn up. White has triple pawns, but those pawns are pretty good. This pawn's annoying for black. This pawn on b3 is defending the c4 square, so nothing can come in there. This pawn is defending the knight. Those pawns are doing a good job. Okay, f5, Nunn tries to get counterplay. Bishop d4, bishop's not really good on a7. Rook g8, defending the bishop. If it was white's turn in this position, white could play f4, attacking the pinned knight, and then white would win. So rook g8 defends. Rook a7, threatening the b7 pawn. Rook b8, hg, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, pawn takes. Now white is 2 pawns up, although white has suspicious pawn structure. Black gets one of his pawns back with knight f4 check, and now we see the king march. King e3 check, king e4. So white's a pawn ahead, and white has a better king, and this knight is sort of trapped. That knight can't move anywhere. My knight has the d5 square, that's a pretty good square. Okay, so Nunn played e6. I guess he heard me say that white has the d5 square, so he played e6. f6, always play f6. d5 check, king d4, rook f7, and king e5. This is actually very funny. He didn't play king e5 here because of rook g5 check. The king has to go back. And instead, he played king d4. Then when the rook went to f7, now he played king e5. And now the rook's no good. My passed pawn is good. My king is good. And finally, this knight can get out, but it doesn't really have a lot of great squares. He played h5, putting in an h. Knight a4. Here comes the knight to better squares. Rook takes h5. Knight e1. Check. Rook f8's forced. King takes e6. You can see whose king is better. Knight b6, threatening. Knight d7 check with advantage, forking the king and rook. Knight check, king takes, check, king c4, knight f5, hoping that Diesen blunders his rook. It's never too late to lose. You can always lose if you want to. But he played rook a8 instead. The truth hurts now. King goes to c5. Man, that white king, it took a nice stroll into black's position. And here Nunn resigned because Nunn's down 3 pawns. The rook trade is inevitable, and I'm going to win this pawn on b7. You can't play king e8 because f7 check wins immediately. So you have to play rook takes, knight takes, and you can't save your pawn. I'm going to take it and be up 3 or 4 pawns and getting a queen and such. Then if I was playing white on my stream, I would promote my b2 pawn to a bishop and mate with bishop and knight. But that's just me. Okay, so that's a pretty nice win for a guy who's a non-famous IM, beating a famous John Nunn, one of the top, I would say, 5 players in British history. Okay, next game. Mark Diesen's playing Nick de Firmian. This was in the aforementioned U.S. Junior Championship in 1976, the one that Diesen won, propelling him to the World Junior in Groningen. Nick de Firmian, famous grandmaster. He's won the U.S. Championship 3 or 4 times, although not in 1976 when he was a junior. Okay, so they played a nice normal Sicilian, Najdorf Sicilian. Nick de Firmian still plays that. G3, positional line. G6. Pretty positional, not too exciting. H3, white wants to play bishop e3, but doesn't want to allow knight g4. Knight c6. Retreats his knight to d2, e2. And typically, white tries to control the d5 square here. Plays knight f4, knight d5, or knight d5 and knight c3. Bishop d7, plays knight d5, takes, and then plays king h2, getting off of this diagonal so he can safely play f4 later and not walk into any checks. Rook c8, rook b1. White wants to play b3 and c4, but white doesn't want his rook on the same diagonal as the bishop. Queen a5, a3, queen c5, threatening c2, c3, bishop b5. Nick de Firmian is a very active player. He puts his pieces on active squares. Bishop e3, when you put your pieces on active squares, sometimes they get kicked back. Queen c7, bishop d4, bishop d3 attacking the rook, rook a1, rook e1, unpinning, g4. Now Diesen plays aggressively. Knight g3. G4, knight g3 is typical in like Peart's and Sicilian lines where white plays an early g3. See Karpov's games where he plays g3 against the Sicilian or the Peart's, and you'll see g4, knight g3 a lot. So black is very passive. Black had pieces here, and one piece went back, one piece did a rigmarole and got back to d7, and the knight, if you move it, I can take your bishop on g7. Usually black wants to keep that bishop. Queen c4, b3, kicking out the queen, queen d3, f4. Now, if the knight moves away, well, there's nowhere to move it, But if you moved it, you lose your queen. But there's nowhere to move it. So you have to play rook takes c3. If you play queen takes queen and I take back, your knight is trapped. The knight has nowhere to go. So he has to sack the exchange, always sack the exchange. Bishop takes, queen takes. Now in this position, white can take the knight and white's up a rook, but look at all the threats that black has. Bishop takes knight, queen takes rook. And I would guess this is good for white also, if I was a betting man. But Diesen played simpler. He played rook c1 before he takes the knight on e5. So Nick de Firmian played super aggressive. His pieces got pushed back, and then he lost them all. Man, it sounds like a lot of my games when I'm on the losing side. Then he took. Now there's no queen here. There's no rook here. So this is a much safer way for white to play. Queen f3. Takes, rook f8. King h1, unpinning his knight. Very important. Rook f1. Knight takes. And here black resigned because black's down a rook. Like, he's not down the exchange, he's down a whole rook. So black's position was okay, and then it just totally fell apart. And you can see from these junior games, in the World Junior and the US Junior, Diesen was just a better player. Strangely, all the other people that played in these events became grandmasters, and at that time, you got your GM norms in Europe. All the Americans went to Europe, played in 4 or 5 tournaments, got their GM norms. I don't remember Diesen doing that. I don't remember Diesen like traveling around Europe playing in tournaments to get norms. I think once he became an IM and World Junior Champion, then he sort of played in 1 US Championship, had to withdraw, quit chess, and became an engineer. So he never got his GM norms, but he was definitely GM strength, as you can see from the games. Okay, this is against Walter Browne in 1976 at Lone Pine. Walter Browne in 76 was a very good player, probably top 20 in the world. Much, much higher rated than Diesen, 260 FIDE points higher. Notice we saw Diesen play e4, now he's playing knight f3. He plays what he wants. And then c4. So he plays a King's Indian style. They transpose to the King's Indian. White plays d4. This is just a normal King's Indian, g3 variation. There was a lot of Botvinnik tall games in these lines. h3, solid. Not too exciting yet. Both sides just slowly developing their pieces. White's considered to have an advantage because white has more space in the center. Very solid play by white. Doubles rooks. Knight e5, threatening the pawn on c4. Bishop f1, always play bishop f1. a3, b3, and then Browne played a tactic which didn't work out well for him. And in my opinion, this is my opinion, Browne didn't necessarily think knight f3 was good. I think he just thought his position was bad because now black can't do anything. White's going to play f4, knight's going to go back to d7. So I think he felt like I have to do something to change the position because white's too solid, white has more space in the center, and I haven't done anything on the queen side. I've advanced, but I can't do anything else. So this might have been desperate. Knight f3 check, bishop takes c3, rook takes d6, so white's up a pawn, knight takes e4, Browne wins his pawn back, and this is the position that Browne must have seen when he played knight f3 and thought, yeah, this is okay. Then rook d3, bishop goes back to g7, bishop d4. It's always good to trade those dark squared bishops. Knight c5 attacking the rook. And probably Browne totally overlooked the next move, bishop takes g7. And the problem is, if you play knight takes d3, obviously white has compensation for the exchange by just moving his bishop away, like bishop a1 and then trying to get on this diagonal for checkmate. But I think bishop c3 is a really good move. And if you play knight b4, which I think is forced, Then I play queen d2, and this doesn't look good for black. For example, the only way to save your knight is c5, and after queen h6, my rule for always sacrificing the exchange seems like a good rule. This doesn't seem good for black. Okay, so Browne didn't take the rook. Browne took the bishop on g7, rook d4, bishop f5, queen c1, and unfortunately for black, white's king is very safe, and Diesen gets a big attack against Walter Browne's king. Knight e4, g4, here comes the attack, c5 counterattack, bishop e6, queen f4, and there's no protection of the dark squares around the black king. White's king is perfectly safe. Pawn structure is almost symmetrical, with both sides pushing on different sides of the board. Knight f6, knight g5, rook a6, unusual move, rook f3, threatening queen takes f6 check, bishop c8, defending sideways, discovered defense, rook d6. Man, Diesen's pretty mean. Big attack on that knight. He's still attacking the knight. Now Diesen wins a pawn, and Diesen's attacking this other pawn. So white's a pawn up. White should be winning. Rook e1, rook e3. Browne doesn't want to trade rooks. Plays rook a1, attacking this pawn and pinning the bishop. Queen e7. Black is forced to trade queens. There's too many threats. Then black takes on a2. White takes here. And in this position, black has a very tough decision to make. And I don't want to say he made the wrong decision, but his decision didn't work out in the end. Nobody wants to play king g8 or king h8, especially with your knight hanging. His only hope is he can somehow queen this pawn. So he played king h6 because that attacks the knight on g5. So then we could queen the pawn, or we could take the knight if white takes on f6. White played knight f3. Notice rook h7 isn't mate because the knight can take, the king can take the knight. So he played knight f3. Now he's threatening g5 check. And he's threatening rook takes knight. So for example, if my knight moves away, g5 check, rook h7 checkmate. So Browne goes for his a pawn. He plays rook a1, g5 check, takes. Now white's threatening rook takes h7 checkmate. So he takes, and plays bishop takes h3 check. Now the king can go to g4, so rook h7 isn't mate anymore. And Browne must have thought this saved him. After the king moves, we play a2. So who's out-calculating whom? And the answer is, this is a Mark Diesen lecture, therefore Mark Diesen's winning. If this was a Walter Browne lecture, then black would be winning. Okay, and white is still winning here, even though white can't stop the pawn on a2. Rook takes h7 check, only legal move. Rook h4 check, only legal move. Knight d4 check, and knight c2, stopping the pawn. If you play king g5 and then take my rook, this pawn doesn't queen, but this one does. White has a passed pawn too. So Browne played king takes f6, knight c2, and then Browne resigned because I guess time trouble was over. So a brilliant tactical sequence from Diesen after outplaying Browne positionally, I would say. And Browne was probably, in 1976, Browne was probably 20th, 25th in the world. Mark Diesen never got the GM title. But this was the year he won everything. He beat Browne in Lone Pine, he won the US Junior, he won the World Junior. It's too bad he quit chess. Okay, and last but not least, as you all know, I'll just pretend there's somebody here. They don't know.
We don't know.
Right. There's two Georgievs that are well known, well, not well known, from Bulgaria. One is Kirill Georgiev. There's also many other Georgievs. There's like 5 GMs named Georgiev. So in Bulgaria, there's Kirill Georgiev and there's Krum Georgiev. And Krum is much lower rated by about 200 points. Kirill Georgiev was top 20 in the world in the 80s and 90s, and now he's not. Krum Georgiev was probably an IM when this game was played. He later became a GM. And I have a story about Krum Georgiev. I'm the only person you're ever going to meet who has a story about Krum Georgiev. In Capella Grande, over 30 years ago, and they still have a tournament there. Capella Grande is the suburb of Dunkirk in France. And in one of the first tournaments they had, I played in that tournament because I lived in Brussels, Belgium. So it was like a 2-hour train ride. Anyway, it was well known when I lived in Belgium that I was really, really, really good at 1-minute chess. And most people who've seen me play 1 minute have seen me play in my 40s and 50s, and they think I'm fast. I don't talk about online 1 minute. Online 1 minute, I'm the worst. I'm talking about over the board. However, in 1990, I'm guessing what year it was. I'm within a year. I was really fast because in 1990, I wasn't old yet. Okay, you can imagine how long ago that was. I wasn't old then. And everybody knew what a great 1-minute player I was. And Krum Georgiev was giving international masters 5 minutes to 1 for money. And Krum Georgiev was taking their money. And my Belgian guys and his Bulgarian guys saw an opportunity. So I played Krum Georgiev for the unofficial 1-minute world championship. Very unofficial. And we had about 100 spectators, and we had an arbiter. And the arbiter was needed. Like game 4 or so, the clock broke during the game. So the arbiter ruled the game didn't count. We'd restart with a new clock. It's a good thing we had an arbiter. Anyway, we played first to win 6 games, like a world championship. And the Bulgarians took all their money, knowing they would win. I was an IM then, and he gave IMs 5-1. So he wasn't worried about playing 1 minute with me. And the Belgians, they'd see me play 1 minute. They weren't worried either. So they put lots of money up. They took all their money and pooled it and bet. And the Belgians said, if I win, I get half the money. That was a good thing for me. Anyway, long story short, and it wasn't short, I won 6-3. And when I won 6-3, the Bulgarians were unhappy, not because their guy lost. They needed that money. They were traveling through Europe. And the Bulgarian captain started strangling me. But I think he was kidding. Maybe. But they were very unhappy, and the Belgian guys didn't care. Belgian guys gave me half, and they were like, yay. If they had lost, they wouldn't have cared either. But the Bulgarian guys were sure they would win. So never be sure you're going to win, because nobody knows. Anyway, this is from 76, when Krum Georgiev was a junior, so he was probably even better at 1 minute then. And this was played at the World Junior Championship in Groningen, another Sicilian. And you remember, Diesen played d4 in a game that was a Najdorf against a Firmian, and now he's playing bishop b5 check. And he played knight f3 against Walter Browne. He just plays what he wants. Knight d7, which is common now, but it wasn't common in 76. And somehow, white played all the normal moves. Black played e6. I don't think black plays e6 now. I don't think that's a common move. Bishop g5, long castle. White's playing super ultra aggressive. h4. And Diesen's a positional player. Strange positional player. Knight c5, bishop f6. So now black has to make a decision. Do I ruin my pawn structure with gf, or do I let him take this pawn? And I think after bishop takes, queen takes isn't the right move, because I can trade queens, take the knight, and take on e4. I think the right move is e5. And you can't take on e5, because I take on c5. And if you play bishop e7, I take on d6. So I think there's no decision here. I think e5 ends the game. I think black has to resign here. I think black just loses a piece. So he has to play gf. And Diesen was happy about that, because Diesen's trying to checkmate him. g4, very blunt. a6, bishop back, Queen e8, that seems very suspicious. Queen e3, the queen wants to go to h6 later. King h8, g5, and black has no attack against white's king, and white's attack is like crashing through already. Ooh, fg. I would never play fg. I would never open the h file. He thought he had nothing better to do than fg? I mean, I would play rook g8 because I played king h8. So rook g8 was the idea. Wow, I'm really surprised by fg. hg, I'm not surprised by that. Rook g8, rook h5. He's got two rooks, one for each of you. Rook g7, plays e5. White's just crashing through everywhere. d5, trying to keep it closed. And now white played a brilliant maneuver, which ended up winning the game. Notice, my knight can't go anywhere good. If you could pick up your knight and place it somewhere, where would you place it if you were white? The answer is actually what he did. He placed it on f6. If white plays knight f6, that's a really good move. So Diesen moved his knight to f6. See, chess is easy. Knight h2, knight g4, knight f6. Knight a4, he ignored it, takes. Now, if you take with a queen, you're hanging your g-pawn, so he took with a pawn. Black has no attack against white's king because black's pieces are here. And after check, he didn't always play king b1, he played king d2 because the king is safe on d2. Black can't attack it. And here comes knight f6. Man, when knight f6 happens, that's the end, that's it. Then we're going to play rook here. We could play queen d3 if we want. We don't have to, just knight f6, rook h1 is checkmate. He played d4, hoping after cd he would get one more check. But Diesen played queen d4, and black has nothing. Black never moved his rook and bishop. Black can't stop knight f6, rook h1, and mate. Black has nothing to do here. So black resigned. I mean, just totally crushed him. And when I read on Wikipedia that Mark Diesen was a positional player, and I looked at like 20 or 30 of his games to get a few for you guys, I was like, I don't know. He plays pretty tactical and complicated. But he's a junior player, so for a junior player, that must be like positional, when you sack everything and move your king to d2 in the opening and play for mate. But yeah, knight f6, rook h1's unstoppable. I put this position in the engine, and it said white was +7. So that's not good for black. So a crushing victory, and in two of those tournaments where I showed you games, Diesen won both of those tournaments, the US Junior and the World Junior. And it's unfortunate he quit chess and decided to get another job, because he would have been a grandmaster and he would have played in many more US championships. But after he finished college and played a little chess, he decided to go to work, and that happens with a lot of rising stars in the US, unfortunately. I didn't go that route, but I tied for first in the US Junior Championship, but I wasn't as strong as Diesen, even though I'm a GM and he's an IM. Truth hurts. Yeah, he died at the age of 51, I believe. I'm not sure what he died of, but he died very young. Anyway, that's my lecture on Mark Diesen. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, contact Karen at atlchessclub.com. I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold. Thanks for watching this video. We have one every week. If you want to have a sponsored video, contact Karen. We actually have sponsored videos all the way out to April. So you'll have to wait a few months because people keep wanting to sponsor videos. They like this video series. I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.